Chicago, great city by the shore, the city of big shoulders, where European immigrants from the East shared crowded concrete corridors with African American migrants from the Deep South. They came from places like Mississippi, Alabama, Arkansas, Louisiana, and Tennessee, to a new promised land. They headed to Chicago, a land full of contrasts and contradictions, of penalties and promises, of tragedies and togetherness. They escaped hopelessness, buoyed by the hope that once they arrived in this thriving industrial urban mecca, they would begin new lives for themselves and their loved ones. Once they arrived in the Windy City, they began heading west.
Everywhere you could see was family, family, family.
It was a nitty-gritty type existence over there.
It was a center of recreation for us. It represented opportunity.
The richness of the culture, that Southern culture, is embedded here on the west side.
Everybody was like built-in babysitters. You turn to your neighbors for everything. You learn to protect your neighbor.
Even before Chicago was founded as a city, Chicago's black base, although small, was as evident as its rich soil and waters. By the time Jean-Baptiste Point de Sable founded the area that is now known as Chicago, Chicago had a population of hundreds of people of African American ancestry. Just after the turn of the century, the West Side was populated by blacks taking part in the post-World War migrations. Heading west reflects on the stories of individuals and institutions that made the Old West Side a special place for millions of Chicagoans of African American ancestry. By remembering the culture that created a rural reality in an urban setting like Chicago, Heading West reconnects the ties that bind the Old West Side to a new West Side.
The West Side is the area of the city's oldest continuous African American settlement. There were people there in 1837 when the city was chartered, as well as in the South Loop area. But as people in the South Loop started to move farther and farther south into what was going to become Black Metropolis or Bronzeville, people on the West Side were still around the Lake Street area, the Lake Street corridor between Racine 1200 West and, let's say, Ashland 1600 West, and then later 2400 West Western, and then down to California 2800 West.
The Near West Side has always been, or was certainly historically, the main point of entry area for newcomers to the city. In the early days, immigration was fed largely through the railroad depots, which existed just across the Chicago River. The old Dearborn Street station was the main station for passenger trains coming from New York. Immigrants in the 1890s, 1880s, 1890s, and so on were coming by boat, going through Ellis Island, and really bypassing New York during this later period because there were jobs that were available in Chicago. And they would come on trains and with their bags walk across the river into the first area of settlement, and that was the Near West Side. And then during the 1880s and 90s, it became a great center for industry because railroads were coming into the city from all points of the Midwest, bringing in raw material, and factories were springing up along the banks of the river. This was one of the river wards of the city and attracted immigrants.
It was a nitty-gritty type existence over there. Black people were integrating a white community made up of some recent immigrants who didn't know that they were supposed to be anti-black. I've seen pictures of black people being invited to Italian weddings before the Italians became indoctrinated.
Even in 1913, an awareness on the part of people at Hull House that African Americans were facing special kinds of problems that immigrant groups before had not.
Well, you were leaving behind every kind of Jim Crow law you could think about.